I'm going to be focusing on dealing with just two key themes or two key subjects. The first is going to be, how do you ask for a pay rise? Some people call it a pay raise, but how do you do it efficiently and how do you do it well? And then I'm going to deal with the second question. How do I get along with my supervisors? How do I get along with my boss? How do I get along with someone that I report to? Very important questions. I'm going to do my best to share from my experiences what I've learned, but also what I've been able to apply. Now, in both question areas or both themes, I found some success, but also I found a lot of, you might call it learning experiences or obstacles and challenges. And that is what I want to really do here today. See if I can draw from my past and draw from my experiences and perhaps use it as a way to advise and guide you in making the right decisions. Now, let's start with the first question. How do I ask for a pay raise? How do I ask for a pay rise? In answering that question, I'm coming about it from two different points of view. Having been an employee years ago, becoming an employee who worked at management level, responsible for so many people at various age groups, but then transitioning to being a business owner myself. What is the right strategy and what's the right approach to ask for a pay rise? The first thing that I tend to suggest, if I could, is you've got to understand human psychology. Business and the way business are set up, a business has one primary purpose, and there's a law that all businesses function by, and that is the law of profit. Every business is there to make a profit. So I tend to say to people, if you're going to ask for a pay rise, if you want to ask for a pay raise, there are some basic, very basic fundamental business laws you have to understand. I'm going to share 3 of those with you so I can show you how the company and the employee can both achieve their desired outcomes. Every business operates to maximize profits. Every employee is there in a job to serve the needs of the customers, of the clients, and to help the company achieve its vision. And in compensation, the employee is rewarded, both in relation to mental development, personal development, professional development, but more importantly, material compensation. So the first law that I want to talk about is the law of compensation. Al Nightingale said something that I love. He said that we get paid in proportion to the quality of service that we provide. In other words, your level of compensation will always be in exact proportion or ratio to, number 1, the need for what you do, number 2, your ability to do it and do it well, but number 3, the difficulty there will be in replacing you. Now, as an employee, I think the law of compensation is something you have to understand. The reason is simply, there are 3 factors that will affect your compensation. And if you want to ask for a pay rise, you have to do a self-analysis on those 3 areas. Number 1, are you really good at what you do? That's the first. The second, is there going to be difficulty in replacing you? Should you choose for whatever reason to walk away, or should the company choose to do away with your service, can they replace you easily? And number 3, is there a need for what you do? Now, if all of those criteria are met, then obviously you can ask for a pay raise. But here is the key. All of us, everyone who works, we get compensated in proportion to the value we create. Your level of compensation is based on the value you're creating and you're providing. It has less to do with what you do. It comes with what I call the intent, the passion, the purpose, the commitment, the focus, the drive that you put into what you do. Now, Wallace Watto said something that I love. He said that there is a science to getting rich. And he said it's an exact science like mathematics or algebra. In other words, he was simply trying to say, if you follow the principles, if you obey the laws, you're guaranteed to be successful. But he goes along to say this, that you can get two people doing exactly the same thing, but the two different people are compensated differently. The reason is simply because it's not about what you do, it's how you do it. So let's assume that you have a desire to ask for a pay raise. Here is my recommendation. Can you delay that by a month? And within the period of a month, I want you to go through a number of step-by-step processes on a daily basis. Number one, before bringing up the topic about pay rise or pay raise to your boss, supervisor, or employer, I want you to go up to your line manager, whoever you report to, and ask them a simple question. The question you should ask is, what do I need to do over and above what I'm doing currently to provide more value to you as a line manager, but more importantly, to provide more value to the company? And the reason you're asking this question is this. When it comes to making decisions about pay rises, the company would always ask one question. Are we maximizing the profit margin from this employee? In other words, is this employee creating value? And what you want to do is build up a portfolio of reasons to support your decision, perhaps to ask for a pay rise. There's nothing so sad and tragic as asking for a pay rise, but the quality of the work you're doing is not very great. If you try that, some people and some companies might go as far as saying, listen, here are your roles and responsibilities. When you joined the company, there were roles and responsibilities that were set up for you. And unfortunately, you haven't been meeting our target. And for that reason, we don't think we can give you a pay rise. But even more importantly, at that point in time, the company is thinking, can we get someone else to do this work at a better quality, at a better level of commitment, but pay them less? Because if they can, the law of profit kicks in, they can make more money. So as an employee, the first thing you have to do is sit down and sit down with your boss and say, listen, what else can I do over and above what I do on a daily basis to create more value? In many cases, my experience, in most cases, most supervisors, most people who are responsible for you and over you will tell you what you need to change. I found in many cases, like back when I had a team of people who I led and I was responsible for, even what you might call a vice president, a director, a line manager, a supervisor, in making a strategic decision about paying more, they often have to consult maybe a team of advisors, people who are in a management board, and they have to give reasons why they're recommending an increase in salary. Now, if you're the CEO, if you're the owner of the company, then you make the decisions. But if you have someone at management level, they have to justify the reason for the recommendation for pay increase. Now, you have to give them the reasons. And the reasons begin when you sit down and say, what can I do differently? But here is what I think is a very powerful question to ask your line manager. What am I doing currently on a daily basis that irritates you? What am I doing on a daily basis, or what have I been doing in the past that perhaps you do not approve of? What do I need to change to be able to provide the level of service that will be sufficient enough for you to consider me to be perhaps one of your elite employees. Now, you're getting into the mind game now. You're getting into understanding psychology. In most cases, every leader is looking for followers that can follow instructions. Followers that can actually do what they've been told to do and do it exceptionally well. Most line managers will tell you, they might say to you, listen, you don't come to work early, you leave early. The quality of your work perhaps is not as good as it should be. You're always rushing. Now this was, if I go back a number of years back, I remember having received feedback like this from someone who I reported to. Now at the point of receiving the feedback, it felt really painful. It felt as though my ego was being attacked. However, you know, in taking the feedback and sitting down after a few days, I started to logically ask myself some strategic questions. What if this is right? What if this is true? Let me give you a side question, a side note. I think this question, perhaps, if asked intelligently, is one of the most important questions that can enable us to achieve a level of breakthrough in any area of our life. Happiness, wealth, success, business, health. The question is this: what am I not seeing? What am I not seeing? Just imagine a painting on the wall. Imagine yourself as the painting on the wall. If you're in the frame, you can't see the picture. You now need someone else to stand back and then critique the painting. Now this is where you need a Picasso, this is where you need a Michelangelo, a Rembrandt. You need someone else to stand back and look at what you've painted and tell you what you need to correct. A great author once said that you should surround yourself with people who see in you and around you and are happy and willing to share that with you. Keep those people around you always, because I found in many cases, even in relationships such as your intimacy and friends, because we value the relationship, most people don't tell you what they see. So if your boss says to you, for example, you're not as technically astute, you're not very careful about the quality of your work, I'm having to check your work consistently when you've completed it, just to make sure that, you know, the final product is right. Take that as an indication that you have to go back to the drawing board and correct a few things. Now, there's a relationship between mentors and proteges that are almost second to none. You taking that advice and welcoming the advice, that's the most important thing. Welcoming the advice and asking if they will be willing to mentor you so that you can progress and increase your value and get better at what you do, is something that is always normally welcomed by a line manager. Now this is the key. It's all psychology. This is the key. By getting your line manager to agree to provide a level of mentoring for you, he or she now takes responsibility for nurturing and making sure that you come out as the perfect product. So now they can become more, not just interested from a line manager's point of view, they become more of a guide, someone who holds you by the hand and guides you, which is what you want. So the second question you have to ask, you know, after you've sat down and said to your line manager, you know, what can I do to provide more value? How can I make your life easier? Ask the second question, what do I need to change? Now let me give you a side note, a second side note. The first one I gave you was, what am I not seeing? Powerful question. If we can ask ourselves this question in any area of life, it has just, that question alone has the ability to change your entire life. Let me give you a second side question. These are 3 questions that you have to ask yourself. It comes as one, but there are 3 sub questions. Number 1, what am I doing every day? In your job, in your work, in your line of employment, what am I doing every day? That's the first question. Number 2, what works? What is working? Number 3, what is not working? Now those 3 questions are very important and strategic. They're connected. Now the whole point of asking yourself those 3 questions is this. You want to take all of your energy and focus away from what is not working and put that all in what is working. You might not be able to ask or answer those questions for yourself, but you can present those questions to your line manager and say, this is what I do every day. Can you tell me what I do well? Can you also tell me what I'm not doing right, what I need to change? So you can take all that energy from what you're not doing well, put it to what you're doing right, and what you find is your value increases. Compensation in the workplace comes in proportion to the difficulty level of the problems you solve. I'm going to say that again because I think it's very important. Your level of compensation is usually in proportion to the difficulty, the level of difficulty of the problems you solve. Someone solves a problem worth £5 an hour, they get paid £5. Another person solves a problem worth £20, they get paid £20 per hour. Someone else solves a problem worth £200, they get paid £200 per hour. So our level of compensation is in proportion to the value we create, but the value we bring is based on the level of difficulty of the problem we solve. Now this is where it gets really key. To climb up the ladder of difficulty or the difficulty scale, you must solve problems. Think about a ladder. To climb up a ladder, you have to put one foot and then another foot. How do you do that? Knowledge and skills. The more knowledge you acquire, the more skills you acquire, the more your wisdom increases. So someone once said something so beautiful. They said, we have a left leg, we have a right leg for a reason. We take a step to the left, then we correct by taking a step to the right. And by making those motions left and right, we move in a straight line. If all you had was 2 left feet, you would just simply go towards your left. Similarly, if you had 2 right feet, you go towards your right. Knowledge and skills are important. You need knowledge, but you also need skills. So to increase the level of difficulty in the problems you solve for a company, you have to invest in yourself. Now, I started off by saying, before you ask for a pay rise, give yourself a month. In that month, what you want to get is what I call supporting evidence to demonstrate that you're worthy of what you're asking for. Most people walk in and say, I want more, and they can't justify what they've been given. The laws of the universe are perfect. They're precise, they're perfect, and they guarantee a promise. I often say that there's a price you have to pay for the future you want. The price has to be paid in full. The price must be paid in advance. You pay the price every day through sacrifice. However, the promise is guaranteed. Now, the promise doesn't come from the same soil. Now, think about this carefully now. A farmer puts seed in the ground. He's guaranteed a harvest. If he nurtures the soil, he's guaranteed a harvest, providing that there is no external circumstances that come against his harvest. However, in life, the way life works, we sow a seed of sacrifice. We sow a seed, we're guaranteed a harvest, but the harvest does not always come from the soil where we sow the seed. What I mean by that is you could be working for a company right now. Let's assume you're doing your best. Let's assume you're an exceptional employee. You're putting in the best performance. However, let's also assume that the company is not compensating you at the level that you deserve. Recognize that what you're going through is through what we call a character building phase. Obviously, we all have the power of choice. In that season, when you're with the company, you may be compensated below what you're worth. But the question you should ask yourself is not really what am I getting from the company. The question is, who am I becoming? Now, I said something a few minutes ago, which was your compensation is based on the level of problems you solve. The more you solve problems, the more you're growing. So it's who you're becoming in pursuit of that salary you want that is the most important thing. You might have to move companies to somewhere else where they recognize your true value and they compensate you based on what you're really worth. So your harvest doesn't always come from where you sow the seed. But the key thing is to remember is this: it's the person you're becoming. Now, I say this simply because I've had experiences whereby people have asked for a pay rise, but the quality of the service they provide does not justify an increase in pay. So what they do is they lower their standards. They stop providing great service because they believe they're not being compensated high enough, which I think is very tragic and very sad. It's not what you get, it's who you become. So let me bring this into perhaps what I call a landing. Let me bring it to a close by saying this. There is the law of compensation. Simply says the quality of and the level of compensation you get will always be in proportion to the service you create. Next to this law is the law of profit. The law of profit deals with the company. The company is saying, can we maximize our profits, and can we get this work done at a better, cheaper price, better quality of service, without affecting our objectives. So you have to understand that your needs and the company's needs have to merge. In other words, the law of compensation and the law of value creation, the law of problem solving must merge with the law of profit, which is where the company comes in. Now let's assume you've gone through all of that and you're happy and content within yourself that you deserve a pay rise. The question is, how do you go about suggesting this? How do you bring this up? There's a way to ask. There's a right way, and there's perhaps a not too clever way. I believe in something called timing. Timing means that there is a time for everything. Timing means, whilst it might be burning in your heart, you wake up in the morning, you walk into the office, and you really have to get it off your chest. Whenever you have that feeling that I have to get this off my chest, that's when you have to be very careful, because you're reacting emotively. You're not reacting rationally. And every line manager has responsibilities far beyond most of the employees. In many cases, they put on a brave face. They have to put on a face that shows leadership. So in many cases, most line managers are wearing a persona that doesn't suggest that they're going through perhaps a difficult time. So the timing of when you ask is important, meaning you've got to read the body language. You've got to read the business environment. You've got to read the atmosphere in the company at that time before you ask. And I would present it in a different way. If you're going to ask for a pay rise, let's assume you're earning, for example, £50,000 per year. And you want to ask for an increase, perhaps up to £55,000. Here is what I would do. I wouldn't go up to my line manager or my boss. I wouldn't even send an email. This is something you must do verbally. Have that conversation. But choose the timing. Now, the timing could be perhaps maybe after lunch break. Maybe if you just observe your line manager and see from their body language how they feel. Are they in a happy mood? If you do it first thing in the morning, they're probably coming into the office with so many thoughts and things and problems to deal with. It's the wrong time. If you do it towards the end of the day, they're overwhelmed. So the timing could be right, maybe midway through the day, but study their body language and perhaps see if they're in a friendly state emotionally before you suggest. Now here is the point. You try not to ask for a pay rise. You must use what I call the principle of auto-suggestion. You just make a suggestion. Now how do you do this? Rather than say, I'd like a pay raise of an extra £5,000, what you could do is say to your line manager that due to your personal commitments, that you really want to know what extra and what it would take and what you have to do to be able to be paid an extra £5,000 every year, or, whatever that amount might be, so that they give you suggestions. So it's not you demanding. It's the difference between auto-suggestion and demanding. If you demand, if your line manager is maybe in a negative mood, he might simply say, tough luck, I'm not giving you any pay rise. Now he might be reacting, or she might be reacting emotively, just so much pressure from the day. But if you come from the principle of auto-suggestion by saying, what do you think I need to do extra over and above what I do every day to be able to earn an extra £5,000, and is that something you think I can achieve within the next month or 6 weeks or 8 weeks? You've given them an opportunity of, number one, what you've done is you've sown the seed in their mind. You put the seed, you haven't asked directly, so they can't say no because you haven't asked. You've simply suggested. The great part of this process is it puts them in a position whereby they have to be a servant leader. So they have to now tell you what you need to do. Now, most managers might say, you're doing a great job. However, from the board of directors, from the management team, we're having a very difficult time at this present moment financially. So rather than put in your request now, why don't you wait for 3 months? Perfect. Now you can come back and say, within the 3-month period, what would you want me to change? What would you want me to do differently? So that when the 3 months period comes, you have someone in your corner supporting your desire, supporting your vision, supporting your mission. Now, those are my thoughts on how you can ask for a pay rise. I hope you found something useful in that. Let me move quickly from the first question to the second question, which is, how do I get along with my boss? That's a very important question. How do I get along with my supervisor? Even more importantly, how do I get along with my colleagues? I love what Abraham Lincoln said. He said, I don't like that man. I must get to know him. I think most people should hold that as a guiding philosophy of life. We're all different. Recognize that we're all different. We're unique. And we naturally are drawn to people who are similar to us. That's a natural fact of life, and that's okay. However, within a corporate structure, if I look back so many years over my working career, when I was still working for a company, one of the areas that I struggled with was loyalty to people above me. I just had a problem with following instructions. Now, some people might relate to that. There were some line managers that I got along well with, and there were some that I didn't. The difference in both cases was my attitude. It came down to just that word, my attitude. My thoughts, my feelings, and my actions. Now, believe this or not, your attitude is like a fragrance. It's like a fragrance. If you have a respectable attitude, you have a fragrance that shows admiration, that shows respect, and people can sense it. Now, you don't even have to open your mouth. People can see it, people can sense it. And part of the reason people can see it and sense it is because about 70% or more of our communication is body language. It's if you add the tonation of your voice, the choice of words, that goes up to maybe 85%. What you say in terms of spoken words is very little. So you might say, I said nothing. No, you said nothing, but your body said everything. The choice of words, the pitch, the tone of your voice said everything. And I found, looking over my career, that there were some people that I got along well with. Maybe they were similar to me, we had maybe similar interests, or maybe I just liked their style of leadership. And there were some people who I didn't get along with very well. Perhaps I didn't like their style of leadership. In some cases, there were times when I felt maybe that technically, that there were things that I knew much more than they did. That is normally a recipe for disaster. Whenever you start to get the feeling that I don't even know why he's my line manager or she is my line manager, they don't even know more than I do. That's arrogance. That's your ego speaking. You have to discipline your ego. And here is the point. My beliefs are firmly rooted, and it took me years to learn what I'm trying to share with you now. At the end of my working career, before I decided to set up something for myself and work for myself and myself alone, I came to a conclusion, and I shared this with a friend of mine. I said to him that there's one thing I wish I had learned very early in my professional career. That's the word honor. If I had learned the importance of honoring people above you much more, I think I would have had a much more successful career. I'm not suggesting that I didn't. I did. But I could have had a much better career. And I want to talk about that word, honor. Many of us understand the ancient script that says, honor your father and your mother. We also may or may not know that there is another part of that recommendation that says you should honor those in authority, people above you. Now here is the point. When I was journeying through my career days, one of the things I found that I did very regularly was I had this flawed attitude of wanting to correct upwards. In other words, if there's something that the management team suggested that I didn't agree with, I felt that it was my responsibility. After all, I had people under me who were reporting to me and who were looking to me for leadership. I felt it was my position to correct management above me. In most cases, what I was suggesting was correct. However, it was the timing, it was the choice of words, and it's how I passed on that information. So here is the first thing I want to say to you is this. If you're struggling to get along with your line manager, there's a possibility that number one, you have, I wouldn't say the wrong attitude. I would say perhaps you need a refinement of attitude. In other words, you have a perceived notion, an idea, a picture of who they are, and that picture you have in your mind is affecting how you think about them. Your thoughts are then controlling how you feel, because energy follows focus, and what you focus on, you feel. And because you feel in a certain way, it's portrayed through the only means possible, which is your body, in language, body language, but also in spoken words. So here is my view. Recognize that we're all different. If someone is above you, they're there for a reason. You have to show honor. And part of that showing honor simply means you have to recognize and respect, even when they're doing and making the wrong choices. You have to assume that they have good intentions, because in many cases, a lot of the decisions that are made, you have no access to all of the nuances and all of the difficulties and all of the steps they have to go through to make a decision. You're simply objectifying your decision based on what you see. So I'll go back to a question that I asked in the first session. The question was this: what am I not seeing? In most cases, when it comes to a supervisor or manager-employee relationship, there is so much the employee cannot see. Let me explain it this way. Imagine you are standing in front of maybe a 70-story building, let's assume you're on the ground floor. All you can see is what your physical sight can see. Now let's assume that you take the elevator and you move up to the 10th floor. You look out the window. Now guess what? You can see far beyond what you could see on the ground floor. If you move all the way up to, say, the 70th floor, guess what now? You can see the whole horizon. It's like being on the mountaintop. You can see far beyond what could have been possible on the ground floor. Now, in most cases, most supervisors are operating at a higher altitude than you are. So there's something they can see that you cannot see. They don't have to explain that to you. What you must do is show honor in, maybe you may not accept, but you have to respect. Now, you can disagree with someone, but you have to respect them. However, within the working environment, you have to agree with your line manager's decision. And the reason is quite simple. You're not responsible for it. She is, or he is. You're simply there to follow instructions. So, the best advice that I can give people, if you want to get along with your line manager, is number one, change the picture you have about them in your mind, because that image you have is controlling your attitude. Number two, you have to understand the law of honor. You have to recognize that correction should never be given upwards. Even, now this is important, even when your line manager says, what do you think I should have done? You've got to be very strategic, you've got to be very careful. And the reason is simply because we're human beings. We react differently to praise as we react to criticism. So in most cases, if you criticize someone, most people see it as a personal attack on themselves as opposed to the decisions they make. Very few people are emotionally, resilient. Very few people can distinguish between the decisions they make and themselves. Most people see it as one. So if you critique someone above you, your line manager, most of them see it as an attack on them as an individual rather than the decisions they make. Now, because you're always going to be, in this case, below the individual, why make your life difficult? Some say, and I used to say this, I don't want to play the game. I'm not the kind of person that plays the game. Let me break your heart a little bit by saying this. Business is a game. It's a sport. There are rules to the game and there are rules to every game. You got to learn the rules. Otherwise, what you come across as is an amateur playing against professionals. If you don't understand the language, if you don't know the rules, you're destined to fail. So, call it whatever you want to call it. You might say you're sucking up. Not really. You might call it in a different manner or using a different word. The point is this. Every business is you're like in a tribe. And those who show honor, those who show respect, more than anything, those who are willing to play the game as a team rather than as individuals are normally the ones who succeed. It's really that simple. So here is the point. If you want to succeed and have a good relationship with your boss, it's important you spend some time and get to know them. It's really that simple. Like I said at the start, Abraham Lincoln said, I don't like that man. I must get to know him. Now, if that's the philosophy you have in mind, what you find is, in many cases, there are some people who are perhaps struggling. My experience working for a company, but also my experience now being a company owner myself, is this. The culture in the company really determines the success of the team and the business. Some companies are so structured in such a way that people cannot be their true selves. So we all have individual problems. Now, the person that you report to, who perhaps you don't like, maybe going through personal problems that you have no clue, zero clue about. Perhaps if you did, you have more empathy. Also, perhaps if they did about you, they'll have more empathy. But the only way you get to know them is when you spend time with them. So my recommendation is simple. If you're not getting along with your line manager well, recognize that you don't have to be buddies, but get to know them and give them the opportunity to get to know you. There may be things that you don't like about them. Here is my best recommendation. Find what they do well and focus on what they do well. Because energy follows focus. You can focus on what's great or you can focus on what isn't great. Whatever you focus on is what determines your feelings. So it's very simple. The relationship between a line manager and a subordinate or an employee can be made really, really strong, and it should be made strong. And here is the point. And I'm going to perhaps digress and talk about other work colleagues, because this goes hand to hand. You might be getting along with your line manager, but you don't get along with your colleagues. We spend, on average, we spend 50% of our waking life at work. Let me explain what I mean by that. 24 hours every day. We spend about 8 hours, 7-8 hours sleeping, give or take. We spend 8 hours in the office. Now, if you take 8 hours of sleep away, you have 16 hours. Of the 16 waking hours, 8 hours you spend in the office, that's 50%. Now, if you add time you spend to travel to work and back from work and preparing for work, for most people it's normally between 3 hours or 3 or 4 hours. Maybe an hour to travel to work, an hour to go back home, an hour to prepare, 3 hours. So when it comes to work, you're spending about 12 hours per day in total out of your 16 waking hours. Now, from the remaining 4 hours, we have to distribute that between various activities to the point whereby, for most people, the quality time we spend interacting with our loved ones in most cases is less than 1 hour. Less than 1 hour. So most of us will spend more time with our colleagues over the course of our life than we'll ever spend with our loved ones. It's all about perspective. My recommendation is this: just start seeing and treating your colleagues as your extended family. Because if you treat them as your extended family, you will find peace and harmony and joy at work. If, on the other hand, you believe that your special friends, who perhaps you only see once a week and who you don't spend that much time with you, if you believe they are the most important and your family is the most important, what you always do is you treat people at work as though perhaps they're second class. They're not up to the level whereby you can love them. It's all about perspective. So my recommendation is this: start to see your boss as occupying the same hierarchy as your mother and your father. Obviously, things might be different if perhaps you don't have parents or if they're not still alive. But here's the point: the same hierarchy that a mother and father plays, the role they play, where the ancient script says you must honor your father and your mother. Now here is what I love about that ancient script. It's the only part amongst 10 or 12 recommendations that were provided that comes with a promise. So the way you are expected to show honor to your parents, I think that's the same way you should show honor to those above you within a working context. That's my honest view. It's a subjective view. But here is the point, and here is what I know for a fact. If you show honor to those above you at work, life becomes easy. And the reason is simple. I know when I had a lot of people working under me, there were some selected few people who I could count on, who had a level of respect and honor for me, and those were the people I protected the most. It didn't mean I didn't show a level of leadership and support to the whole team. I did. But I also have emotions. You have emotions. And there were some people that treated me like family, and even without knowing, I found that I reacted to them very differently than the rest of the group. You're not trying to suck up. You're simply playing the rules of the game. Learn the language, learn how to communicate, learn how to express yourselves, because that helps you. Now, this is a side note. Now think about this. More people get fired from work as a result of a lack of skill in relation to people's skill compared to professional competence. In other words, your intellectual ability, your IQ, is an entry-level requirement, but what really makes you successful within a working environment is emotional intelligence, is your emotional EQ. But here is the point. No one was taught, but I certainly wasn't trained or taught about any of these. We were trained according to the formal process of learning. You learn academic education and then professional education. And you're expected to just go into the workplace and everything is perfect. Now I've looked back and I found that one of the most important things we have to learn is how to manage our emotions. We have to learn how to think with our emotions, not think from our emotions. So a lot of the decisions we make within the working environment that do not turn out to be great are those we make emotionally. And if we can take out emotions and simply treat people how we would want to be treated, it makes a whole difference. Now, let me conclude by recommending a book, a great book. It's Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's a great book because it deals with just understanding the value of relationships, but also it shows you various ways in which you can interact with people, get along with people without being manipulative. Now, the title of the book will suggest otherwise, but it's a great book. For those who are interested in perhaps learning more, I would recommend you start with that book because it very easily shows you how humans think. And the more you understand people and the more you understand yourself, the more it's easier for you to get along with your work colleagues. Let me conclude with maybe one or two lines about your work colleagues. We've dealt with your line manager. What about the rest of the work team? The same principles apply. You have to show honor, even though they're not above you, but it follows the golden principle. You do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. Really simple. In other words, you must show love because that's how you receive love. If you want respect, you have to give respect. If you want happiness, you have to sow happiness. If you want success, you have to find someone to pour into, and that comes back. It follows the laws of the universe. Some call it the law of sowing and reaping. Some call it the law of cause and effect. Some call it karma. But here is the point. You cannot attract into your life that which you repel in thought. It just won't happen. You have to give whatever you want. So I would suggest that with your colleagues, you apply the same principle and relational strategy that you would with your line manager. In other words, just treat people well, treat people nicely, and treat people the way you would want to be treated. Now, when it comes to your colleagues, your responsibility is not to change people. I think you have to recognize that there are a few things that you cannot change. You can't change the weather, not by yourself. You can't change the economy, not by yourself. You can't change people. What you can do is change how you react and how you respond to circumstances. There are some people who, no matter how much you pour into them in terms of good, there's some people who will always give you back something bad, no matter how much you give them good. Recognize that there are some people like that. There are few of them in the world, but there are some. So here is my recommendation. Pareto had a principle he called the 80-20 principle. And in this, he said that about 80% of your success will come from about 20% of the activities that you do. He also said that if you apply this principle to various areas of life, maybe it wouldn't be 80-20, it could be 90-10, 70-30, but he was making a point. He was simply saying, you've got to understand the numbers. I think one of the things you should have at the back of your mind within a working environment is that principle. In other words, I tend to say to people, spend time with people who recognize and who see the good in you. Spend time with people who see the greatness in you. There will be people who don't dig you and people who don't see anything great in you. You're not called to the entire world. You're called to a selected few. Find your tribe, find the few people. And the reason is simply because even in a working environment, you can be friendly with everyone, but you cannot be friends with everyone. And you cannot even attempt to do that without, in a way, losing yourself of your true identity. Because if you're trying to be friends with everyone, there's one person that you perhaps disappoint, and that's yourself, because you'll be, in many cases, trying to live up to people's expectations of you. So I would simply say, in the working environment, find your 20%. Find those people who perhaps get along and understand you, and spend 80% of your time with them. And for the rest, the remaining 80% of the people, you can give them 20% of your time. Now, this doesn't in any way suggest that you should treat the 80% of the people who don't like you wrong. No, you have to still show honor. You got to show respect. You got to show love. However, what you don't do is invest your time. You don't invest your time. There are three things that make a difference in our lives: our talents, our gifts, skills, and talents, money, and time. Time is the only thing that you have complete control over: your time. So my recommendation is this: spend 80% of your time with the 20% of the people in your working environment, your colleagues. Spend 80% of your time with that small tribe of people who get you. Now, do your best to get to know the others, but don't invest your emotions, don't invest your time, don't invest your energy, don't invest your efforts if you know within your heart that that is not your tribe. You've got to know where your tribe is and apply the law of selectivity. Choose where you invest your focus. I hope that's been useful. That's where I'm going to stop today. I hope you found something perhaps worth sitting in for. Allow me to wish you the best of luck, whatever your decisions might be. Recognize something, that it's a journey. It's a journey. I always ask that you do two things at the end of every day. Sit down and ask yourself, what did I do right? Number two, what could I have done differently? Progress and growth comes by deliberate practice, by sitting down and looking at what you've done and trying to course correct. Find out things you could have done differently and change it. So here is my recommendation. You're never going to get it completely right. Every day is an opportunity for you to correct the wrongs of yesterday. So I would advise, at the end of today, sit down and ask yourself those two questions. What did I do right? What could I have done differently? The key then is whatever you did well, hold on to it. Whatever you could have done differently, make an effort. Attempt to correct and to grow and to progress the next day. Now, I hope you found something great. I hope you've perhaps found something you can apply in your life. Now, here is the last statement I would make. No one has all the answers. I don't see myself to be an exception to that rule. So I've shared some ideas with you. Perhaps everything wasn't for you. Find one idea that was for you, but don't just accept the idea. Sit down, think about it, study other people, gather information from other sources, and then decide for yourself what you think was right for you. Decide which of those and which of the ideas you can apply to your life, because you're obviously very unique and different to myself, and I don't want you to simply conform and follow people's recommendations. Advice is freely given. You have to qualify the ideas you get and choose the right ones for you. I wish you the best of. God bless.